You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to episode 64 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. We have two game ones to cover in today's show, the Celtics and Cavs, and of course the Warriors and Rockets. And that's exactly where we're going to begin. We're going to start with how the Rockets established a sizable lead in the first quarter. But the Warriors, they didn't panic. And as expected, they slowed the pace right down. And they wore down the Rockets outside of Paul and Harden. Those two, of course I'm referring to Chris Paul and James Harden, they combined for 64 points on 22 of 41 shooting, which isn't great. But when you look at the rest of the Rockets, who are a combined 17 of 44 from the field, and that's just not going to cut it. Because the supporting cast for the Rockets, that's their advantage. And if they produce like that going forward, I don't like the Rockets' chances to even be competitive in this. Because you look at the game that James Harden just had, and they were barely competitive in this ball game in the fourth quarter, and they eventually were blown out. And what compounded this issue, it wasn't just bad shooting, is when the Warriors got hot, the Rockets just simply couldn't keep up and they started to panic. And that's when you saw a lot of turnovers for the Rockets. They ended up with 23 turnovers. So for a team that prides itself on its efficiency, especially on the offensive end, for them to be turning the ball over that much and shooting it that badly, that tells you that there's a lot of issues there that need to be fixed. And the biggest issue that they're going to have to iron out is their reliance on their isolation plays. This is a recipe for disaster in the playoffs. Because look, these plays work in the regular season. But when you play against a team as good as Golden State, it's just, you're asking for trouble. Because they can just zone in. Because it wasn't just the fact that they were running isolations. You can run isolations in the playoffs, but you need to have movement and activity away from the ball. And they just didn't have that at all. Even the commentators were saying, look, they just can't stand still here. Because if you stand still, whoever is guarding off the ball, and I consider players not in pick and rolls off the ball. So if you're defending your man and your man is screening, then you're on the ball. So I'm talking about the other three guys, right? The other three guys can still come over and help, and they can just zone up. And we saw so much more activity from the Warriors on the defensive end than we saw from the Rockets on the offensive end. And whenever the defense is able to dictate the pace and the flow on one side of the court, it's over. The game is over. And we saw that at times. That's why the Rockets looked completely lost. Now, the obvious question right now is, do the Rockets have a counter? Do they have any type of counter to this? Because this is really that was their bread and butter. High screens and isolation plays. Now, I've already mentioned that they need to get some more movement off the ball. But beyond that, when you look at their personnel, it's either catch and shoot guys, like Eric Gordon. I mean, that's a stretch. Eric Gordon does have the ability to create somewhat, but his forte is shooting. Gerald Green. You've got guys that aren't really good. Ryan Anderson, then Trevor Ariza. They're not really good at creating their own shot. You can't put them in the post. You can't do a whole lot else with them apart from allow Chris Paul or James Harden to create for them. So if those guys are being stifled, and once again, it's hard to say that James Harden was stifled with 40-something points, but a lot of those situations, they were forced upon him. He did not play that great. He didn't play bad either, but he definitely did not play that great. He could have played a lot better. And what I mean by that is if you just look at the numbers, you just look at the box score, you'd say, yeah, this is a great game by him. But the reality is he did not force his will on this game. There's a difference between getting 41 points and getting crushed and getting 41 points and controlling the tempo of the game and not allowing your team to get blown out of the building, which is what happened. So I don't think it was a great performance by James Harden. He needs to have a little bit more control on the ball game and stamp his authority on the game. We've seen him do this in the past. There's a big difference between and it's obviously not just in the competition, but there's a huge difference between his performance in Game 1 against the Minnesota Timberwolves, similar numbers, and what we just saw in Game 1 against the Warriors. But getting back to the question of what can they do, their personnel, there isn't a whole lot there. Look, I wouldn't mind seeing, just for some variation, having a pick and roll with Chris Paul and James Harden, and then force them to collapse. Because there's a difference between forcing a team to collapse and forcing and allowing on the defensive end and allowing them to dictate and swarm and having 3 free safeties back there and able to pick off passes or deflect passes or contest shots and rotate. If you force them to collapse, then all of a sudden you're opening things up a little bit more and you're getting a lot more space for these guys like Eric Gordon or Ariza, who are capable of doing things in space and not capable of, it's funny I say that because we're talking about the Houston Rockets, but they're not really creators when there's pressure on them. And that's what we saw happen today. So there isn't a whole lot in terms of when you look at the personnel that the Rockets have for them to make a whole lot of changes. But do I think it's time for them to panic? No, of course not. It's only one game. And we'll get into the importance of Game 2 in a second. But they do need to be concerned because, as I said, James Harden had a pretty good night, as did Chris Paul, but they still got absolutely blown out. And we haven't seen that. We've seen games where James Harden's had a bad game or Chris Paul's had a bad game and they've lost the game. It's very rare that we've seen both guys have good games and they still get blown out. Now, as I mentioned before, the Warriors' poise was the difference in this game. Early on, and pretty much for the entire game, I should say, Steph Curry struggled and Durant dominated and Thompson picked his game up. But when you look at the numbers, Thompson had 42, Durant had 40, Draymond Green had 37, Curry had 35. Look, if that's going to be the standard going forward, and if this is a long series, that could be an issue. Because keep in mind that this is now the 4th long season in a row for the Warriors. And I know you're going to be motivated, and it's not a question of motivation. Fatigue happens. Even the greatest of players need a rest at times. And if these guys, at some point, your body does wear down. So as I said, if this is a long series, and believe me, Golden State's going to do everything within their power to prevent it from being a long series. And we saw that by them going back to that optimum lineup, that premium lineup they have, the lineup of death, to start the game. They want to end this series early. They want to go for the jugular right now. And a lot of people are saying that the Rockets are done right now. But I mean, come on. It is just one game. And it's a 7-game series. And yes, the Warriors have won 15 straight home games in the playoffs. And obviously the Rockets have to go into Golden State now and take at least one. But that streak will mean absolutely nothing to the Rockets. Do you really think in Games 3 or in Games 4 that the Rockets are going to be thinking, oh, we have to break this streak? No, they're going to think we have to get this home court back. That's the only thing that's going to be on their mind. But they cannot look to it like that. They can't look ahead. Because Game 2, without exaggeration, for the Houston Rockets, is the biggest game that this franchise has had since 1995. And it's the biggest game of both Chris Paul and James Harden's career. It's the ultimate pressure game. And they've got to win to get back into the series. Now, if they drop 2 games at home, there's no coming back from that. Golden State should be sensing the opportunity. Because remember what I was saying before about them trying to end this series early so they can get some rest, so they don't have to overplay all these players, their core players, like what happened in 2016 when they had to overplay their guys in the conference finals against the Thunder and Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook. They do not want a repeat of that situation. So they're going to realize that Game 2 is critical for them to finish this series early. So we may have a Game 7 kind of atmosphere in Game 2. As ridiculous as that sounds. Because you got one team that needs, in their mind, they need to finish this series early, and the other team needs to win to stay in this series. So it's going to be good to see how both teams approach what, in their minds, is a must-win game. Well, it's really only a must-win game for Houston. And now we get to talk about the game that I was dreaded to talk about, and that's the Cavs and Celtics. See, you guys think I hate LeBron. If I hated LeBron, I would love to talk about this game. I would have absolutely loved it. I'd be like, yeah, this guy, he sucked. He was terrible. We're all validated. Jordan forever. I don't hate LeBron James. And I hate talking about games like this, performances like this. I really do. But this game was ugly. There's no other way to describe it. The Cavs, who got whatever and whenever they wanted against Toronto, was slapped around unrepentantly by Boston. And as bad as this game appeared live, the box score was even worse. LeBron did seem rattled or disinterested. It had to be one or the other, so pick one. And quite honestly, that did surprise me, because we saw a ruthless killer instinct from LeBron at times against the Pacers, and also throughout the Raptors series. But we saw a complete drop-off. So either he didn't take the Celtics seriously, or the Celtics are just that much better. And if you're a Cavs fan, you better hope it's the former. You better hope that they just didn't take them seriously. Because as grievous and as unforgivable as that is, at least there's hope coming back. If this is the best that the Cavs have got, this is going to get even uglier. Because the Celtics, they're just going to grow with confidence. Now, getting back to LeBron, this was one of his worst playoff performances of his entire career. And I'm not trying to overplay it, but yes, at the negative 32 points is pathetic. As is 15 points on 5 of 16 shooting and 7 turnovers with little to no defensive impact. But it's one freaking game. And even if the Cavs drop game 2, we have seen a distinct difference between the Celtics at home and the Celtics on the road. Now, the one thing that Cleveland has to fix, though, is their overall speed. And Philly ran into this problem until they brought in McConnell and started giving him big minutes. The speed of the Boston Celtics at every single position was the difference in this game. There's no question about it. And this is what happened, as I said, this is what happened in the Philly series. Is you look at all their players, even just look at their starting five, and you think, oh, well, they're undersized. But then you look at their bench players and how they play, they just swarm. And their bench players, they don't even maintain that intensity. They lift the intensity, if you can believe that. Players coming in off the bench now are picking up the speed and the pace. Now, what I did say before is true too, is we see a very different Celtics team on the road than what we do at home. So that's something to factor in. But if you're Kyle Korver, be prepared for your minutes to be cut significantly. In fact, it's not just Korver that's going to be affected by this. There's no way they can play both Thompson and Kevin Love. They're going to get run out of the building. And it has to be one or the other. They cannot play them both alongside each other. Now, the question now lies is, does Cleveland have the depth to pretty much to try and counter this speed? You got Rodney Hood, you got Larry Nance Jr., you've got Jeff Green, you got Jordan Clarkson. All of those players, they can play at that speed a lot better than some of the other players like Kyle Korver or Tristan Thompson, for example. But they are so wildly inconsistent on the offensive and defensive end, then I'm not sure how much of a chance they really have going forward. The Cavs need to slow this pace down, but it's not even a pacing. Even if you slow the pace down, the speed of these players from the Celtics is still going to wreak havoc on what the Cavs want to do offensively. They're in a bit of trouble, but it's not because they lost game 1 by a blowout. It's just because when I look at exactly how they're going to fix these issues, do they have the consistent depth to counter that? Let's move along to some questions now. And the first question I got is, if Houston gets bounced and Golden State wins another title, will LeBron go to Houston? Oh, God, I hope not. Oh, God, I hope not. It could happen, though. That's why I can only laugh. I mean, it's possible. It's totally possible. I'm not sure what the cap situation is. I'm not sure if they'd have to give up players. or if they could just sign him because the cap keeps going up as well. I don't think it'll work because Chris Paul, James Harden, they're at a maximum in terms of deferring to each other as it is. I'm not sure how they would go with another guy who thinks he's a point guard. They may as well bring in DeMarcus Cousins too, and they could all fight over who's a point guard. Next question is a gentleman who says he's a fan of the Nets, but how confident should he be for next season? And I'm telling you what, man, forget about confidence. I think you should be worried about where your next drink is. And what I mean by that is, are you not watching the Boston Celtics? Are you not seeing Brown and Tatum, players that Boston got because of the Pierce, KG, and Jason Terry trade, just tear up the Eastern Conference? And the Nets are going to have to deal with that because they're in the same division. They're going to have to deal with seeing the Celtics running around with these thoroughbreds for at least another decade, unless if one gets injured or they force a trade or something. So yeah, maybe you should look which whiskey or vodka you want in the next decade. Have it on tap. On a serious note, though, I did like what they did because they were dead in the water in terms of talent until they brought in D'Angelo Russell, and they brought in Okafor from Philly as well. And they didn't have to give up a whole lot, just really cap space. And no one was going to go to Brooklyn anyway, unless if they were starting to bring in some talent. So I am impressed that they've got at least a chance of some players developing into something and being competitive for a playoff spot over the next 5 to 10 years. Because that trade just absolutely killed them, that Garnett trade. So I am impressed by that. But man, I tell you what, email me back and tell me how you feel about Brown and Tatum playing for the Celtics. Next question, it's more of a comment, but Kevin Durant is a WMD, weapons of mass destruction. And yes, he is, but he also has the ability to completely implode as well. Just ask the Thunder about Game 6 of the 2016 Western Conference Finals. Next question is, should Draymond Green be suspended for his throat punch on Harden? And that's a little bit of an exaggeration. I wouldn't say it was a throat punch. I wouldn't suspend him for that, though. I would have suspended him for the kick to the nuts of Steven Adams. That was unbelievable. I also would have had a real long look at the wrestling shenanigans that he had with Anthony Davis. I thought they were dirty plays. But it was a shove to James Harden. It wasn't a throat punch. Come on. Next question. Has Russell Westbrook revolutionized the point guard position with his athleticism? This is a good question. We're getting somewhere here. And no. It's a good question, but no. He hasn't revolutionized the point guard position with his athleticism. Because we've seen super athletic point guards before. From Derrick Rose, Steve Francis, Baron Davis is another one. Penny Hardaway was incredibly athletic. He was 6'9". You might think, well, 6'9". Most point guards that are that big, like Magic Johnson, they're not typically athletic. But Penny Hardaway, he was quick, man. So, other point guards that come to mind as well is Jason Kidd. He wasn't a high flyer, but he was strong and he was super quick. So he hasn't really revolutionized it from the athletic standpoint. But in terms of the production standpoint, you can absolutely make an argument that Russell Westbrook is on the verge of revolutionizing the game from the point guard position. In a similar way to, you could talk about how LeBron James revolutionized the small forward position by being a bigger Karl Malone dimensions playing the 3 spot. So you could talk about that and Westbrook doing everything. It's funny, we talk about revolution and people use the word revolution as changing, but what is a revolution? That's a 360. It's going around in a circle. So it's ending up to the spot that you once were, right? So the point that I'm making is maybe we've gone all the way back. Maybe we've gone all the way back to the Oscar Robertson, Magic Johnson, where the point guard does everything. Just something to keep in mind. Next question is, Duncan, Hakeem, Shaq, Kevin Garnett, Patrick Ewing, David Robinson, Charles Barkley, Karl Malone, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Has the game gotten better or worse with the diminished role of a traditional and dominant big man? This is a great question. But I do need to pick you up on something first. I would not include Kevin Garnett as a quote-unquote traditional big man. Because when he was in Minnesota, for a long period of time in Minnesota, he was actually playing the 3 position. When he first came in, he didn't have the strength, the lower or upper body strength to play the 4. So it was Tom Gugliotta who was playing the 4. And then they brought in Joe Smith to play alongside him. And then as Garnett got stronger, then he started to play the 4 defensively, but he was still playing almost like a point forward role, not bringing the ball up the court, but he was playing a point forward where he was looking to facilitate and run the offense through him, looking to create first, as opposed to looking to score like a Dominique Wilkins or a Dr. J would. So I would not include Kevin Garnett in that list. But getting back to the question, and this is a question that I often think about it, so I was happy to get this so I could talk about it, is I'm kind of torn by this, because on one hand, I love seeing players continue, they're not being defined by their position. It's kind of like a pickup basketball. Like you don't want to see players like you don't want to see players like Shaq, for example. I'd much rather an Hakeem Olajuwon than a Shaquille O'Neal, because Hakeem, it doesn't matter what defense you play against him during his prime, he could find a counter because he had different counters. It didn't matter if he was going up against Patrick Ewing. It didn't matter if he was going up against Karl Malone. It didn't matter if he was going up against Shaq. It didn't matter if he was going up against David Robinson or Charles Barkley. He would find weaknesses, and you couldn't counter everything. So I'd love that about him. Now, on the same token, I do love the ability not the ability, but the concept of positions having specific roles. And I keep thinking back to American football, where you have a running back, you have linemen, you have wide receivers, you have quarterbacks. Now, you can have, like, certain situations, you could have Michael Vick, who's essentially a running back that plays quarterback. He has running back skills from an athletic standpoint, but his skills, he can still throw the ball, so he's versatile, right? So I do like that in basketball too. I love that, guys like Russell Westbrook or James Harden, they can run an offense, but they can still score if they need to. They can put up big numbers if they need to. And when it comes to a center, I can't see a whole lot wrong with a guy being able to step outside and make a jumper if a defense, especially with a zone defense, tell me what's more valuable, Joel Embiid or Hassan Whiteside. Whiteside is much more of a traditional center than what Joel Embiid is. Now, if you put Joel Embiid in the 90s or the 80s, then you also put Hassan Whiteside in the 80s or 90s, I guarantee you that Embiid is a better player back then as well. So I don't think it's necessarily a diminished role. It might just be a diminished talent base or talent level at that position, if that makes sense. Is this something that I've been thinking about? Which one is it? Is it just there's just not enough roles for these big men, traditional big men? Or is it the fact that the talent isn't there? And I don't think the game has gone that far, has accelerated in terms of its evolution, not revolution, but its evolution. I don't think it's gone that far away from big men. It's just that the big men, we've gone through a drought. Now we're starting to we've seen the rebirth over the last couple of years of centers. But the one thing that does irritate me, there is a fine line with this. Because you look at a guy like DeMarcus Cousins, who's 6'10", 11, 7 feet, whatever he is, 270 pounds, massive body, has all the skills as well. And all those skills are now a detriment to him, because he should just be punishing defenders on the low block. His size he should just be killing people. Well, okay, maybe not literally killing people, but he should be just going down low, forcing teams to double him. Instead, he's trying to bring the ball up. He's trying to play point guard. That's why I referenced him before when they questioned about LeBron going to Houston. Well, you've already got James Harden and Chris Paul. You bring in LeBron, and then you bring in DeMarcus Cousins, and they can all fight to be point guards. But anyway, getting back to the football analogy, that would be akin to a lineman, a dominant lineman, trying to play quarterback. That's just silly. So I think the game has gotten better, but I don't think we've really seen diminished roles of the big man. I just think we've seen a lack of talent at that position. Because when that talent starts coming through again, teams will find how to use them. This is great. We've gone through one, two, three, four, five questions. We've only answered one about LeBron. This is unbelievable. We'll answer some now because they're always good fun. Could LeBron and Durant team up this offseason? He said, "You're killing me." Yeah, they could. This is why it kills me. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if we saw that. How would they justify that? Oh boy. They would have to go to a neutral team. Maybe the Lakers. Oh my. Oh. You know what? Let's go to one that I can actually enjoy. I'm talking about questions, by the way, not teams. Is it possible? What odds are we talking about for LeBron to catch Jordan? I hate to break it to you. I don't think there is a way. There is a pathway for LeBron to catch Jordan. He would have to do something ridiculous. I mean, he'd have to run off like a three-peat now. I have him, and I cop a lot of crap for this. I have him in my top 10. But he's closer to number 10 than he is number 5. He has the ability to get up to number 5, maybe even higher. But there's just... I keep saying this, so if you're a regular listener to the show, I apologize. But for every great performance, it feels like there's an equally bad performance on the other end. And if you don't watch the games and you just look at the stat sheet, you would think, what are you talking about? He's consistently good. Look at his averages. That's true, but you look if you're a serious basketball fan, you'll know what I'm talking about here. There are so many examples of him, and game 1 is an example of this, where he just does not help his team in pressure moments. Whether it's defense, whether it's passing, whether it's recognizing that, okay, this game's playing at a speed or a pace that I don't like right now, so we're going to have to change this. Now, every player has gone through this. Do not get me wrong. Even Jordan, Magic, Larry, all those guys, right? Hakeem, you could run the list that I have of players ahead of him, and you can say, but yes, they all have experiences, but not to the same levels where it consistently happens with LeBron. Put it this way. When a bad game happens for Jordan, or even with Kobe, right? And people think it's sacrilegious to even bring up Kobe's name towards LeBron's, which that infuriates me, because yes, I do have LeBron ahead of Kobe, but I never get upset when people bring up Kobe's name in comparison to Jordan. And I think Jordan's way ahead of all of them, right? So if I'm not going to get upset over that, how the hell are people going to get upset if people compare Kobe to LeBron and compare the careers there? There are certain things that Kobe did that LeBron's not even close to. And I'm talking about his impact on the defensive end, and obviously the amount of championships he won as well, which, as much as LeBron James fans hate to hear, is definitely part of the equation when figuring out a player's greatness. When has it not been? Anyway, getting back to the question, there are far too many examples of LeBron just not showing up in big games. Do I think he's a great player? Yes. But do I think there's a pathway for him to get to Jordan? No, I don't. Not a realistic one, anyway. Now, I'm more than happy to be proven wrong. And if you think that I'm just being bitter, just listen to the disappointment in my voice. I'm not jumping up and down and celebrating, because, quite honestly, as a basketball fan, if LeBron was exceeding Jordan and had surpassed him, we all win because we all see that level. I would love nothing else than to see that. But isn't it a damning indictment to LeBron James fans that I have to put that footnote in to justify my stance? That's how sensitive they are. And I'm not saying, okay, I should say LeBron James worshippers, not LeBron James fans. But I can't even give you an honest opinion without saying, look, I want him to actually get there. But I'll still cop backlash for it. I don't care. Anyway, game 2s that are coming up, Celtics and Cavs. We'll do the previews and we'll do it this way. I don't want to do a game episodes because it turns into me talking for about 5 to 10 minutes on one game and then just straight into the mailbag for 20 minutes, which is a bit too long. So what we'll do is I'll recap the games as we go. So we'll have the recaps for games 2, for both games of games 2, both games for games 3, games 4, etc., etc. So in that being said, I'll also do the previews at the same time. So we'll start with the Celtics and Cavs, and I think we'll see some lineup changes. Tyronn Lue, for all the criticism that is thrown at him, he is not afraid to make lineup changes. So I think we'll see Korver get his minutes cut, unfortunately, because he played really well the first 2 series, but he's just, basketball comes down to matchups sometimes. And he's not a very good matchup for the Cavs in this series. You'll also see limited minutes for Thompson and Love together. And I think LeBron will play a lot better. I mean, if he puts in another performance like he did in game 1, then some of these concerns can be warranted. But right now, I don't think that's really fair on him, especially when you look at how well he has played in the playoffs so far. As for a result, I think the Cavs get the next game, but we will see. It wouldn't surprise me. I feel like I'm going against what my mind is telling me. Sorry, because I want to see a long series here, but the Celtics, their speed on offense and defense, yeah. Look, I just hope the Cavs win so we get a long series. As for the Rockets and Warriors, I will go with the Rockets for that because despite the Warriors wanting to put an end to this early, there's a difference between playing for your life and playing for the time of your life. I can't remember who said that, but I can't stop thinking about it. And the Rockets, if they lose this game, then we could absolutely see a situation where they get swept. And if that happens, if they get swept, there will be no difference between the Rockets being a disappointment and the Raptors being a disappointment. And we've seen big changes in the Raptors already with Casey getting fired. Would we see big changes for the Rockets in that situation as well? It's probably warranted at that point. What I'm getting here, though, is beyond just changes, careers, their legacies of Chris Paul and James Harden they're on the line, as is Mike D'Antoni's. And if they get swept in this situation, there is no coming back from this, especially for a guy like Chris Paul. So I think they're going to have to do whatever it takes to win. They need to get this win. So by that standpoint, even though the Warriors would love nothing else than to go up 2-0, the Rockets, their backs are against the wall. And we will see the fight they have. This is what I love about the playoffs. With the one loss puts a team completely with their back up against the wall. So I'd like to see that. And I'd like to see the Rockets win just so we get another long series. Anyway, guys, some good questions, some entertaining questions. You got some laughs out of me. That was good. Check back in, not tomorrow, but the next day, and we'll have another recap of the Game 2s and a preview of the Game 3s, along with some more questions. Enjoy the game, guys, and take care.